We are recording the interview of Tera Pollard. The interview is being conducted by David Morse from the Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. The interview is being recorded at Wright State University's Veterans Military Center in Dayton, Ohio. It is 9:08. And it is the 18th of August, 2016. All right, let's begin with just when and where you were born.
I was born in Belleville, Illinois, August 22nd, 1972.
Okay. And who are your parents?
Virginia Begley and Harold Mandry II.
Okay. And what were their occupations?
So my biological father was in the Air Force at the time I was born, so I was actually born at Scott Air Force Base. My mother currently works as a unit coordinator for neonatal intensive care unit in a local hospital here.
And did you have any siblings?
I have an older sister, a younger brother, and then a younger half-brother who's much younger.
Okay.
I actually have a daughter the same age as my younger half-brother.
Oh, wow.
So.
Okay. Any of your siblings serve?
No.
No.
Only my biological father.
Okay. All right. What did you do before you entered the service?
High school, and then I kind of goofed off for a year before I went into the military. Was working at Kmart at that time.
Okay. All right. So what branch of the military did you end up going into?
The U.S. Navy.
U.S. Navy.
Yes.
Tell me, how did you end up going into the Navy? What did you enlist?
I did enlist.
Okay.
It was actually kind of a spur of the moment decision. I was just, had been out of high school maybe a year. Less than a year when I depped in. I had to go into the delayed entry program, but I had been out of high school about 9 months and was really bored, not really sure what I was going to do, wanted to go to school but couldn't really afford to go to school, and I saw a commercial for the Navy and I thought, why not?
Yeah.
So I called the recruiter and ended up joining the Navy. I wanted to be by the ocean, didn't want to be landlocked anymore, so the Navy was the branch that made sense to me.
Good. Oh, and what time was this that you enlisted into the Navy?
What time? Or
Yeah. What year?
It was in 1991, so I depped in March of 91, and I actually left for boot camp July of 1991.
Okay. All right. What was your family's feelings about you joining the Navy?
Everybody was surprised. My family and my friends were all very surprised. Actually, my stepfather tried to talk me out of it initially. My mom kind of thought I wouldn't really go through with it. So I think everybody was just kind of shocked.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me about boot camp. Where was boot camp at?
So I went to boot camp in Orlando, Florida.
Oh, nice.
Had the privilege of being there July, August, and part of September. So absolute hottest months of the year. Miserable time to be in Orlando. We typically had a black flag out by 8 or 9 in the morning, meaning we were getting up 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning to eat breakfast so that they could do all of the outside stuff with us before the black flag was in place. So.
Wow. What were your instructors like?
Very difficult. We had 2 female company commanders, and I would say at least at that time, female company commanders felt like they had something to prove. So we were the first company for both, first company for both company commanders, so they really felt like they had something to prove. So we had it a lot harder than most of the other companies in our division, and even the other company commanders would tell us how sorry they felt for us. the only privilege we really earned in boot camp, if we aced an inspection, we earned the right to lean against the bulkhead or the wall for maybe 10 or 15 minutes as a reward, instead of just having to sit not leaning against anything when we sat on the floor.
Wow.
I think other than that, the only other privilege we really earned was like 1 can of soda.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
We had it rough, but we ended up being the CO's white company, so the best company in the division when I graduated boot camp. And I think that's because we were all completely terrified of messing up in any way.
That's funny. So you said this was, you entered into boot camp in 91?
91.
Okay. Was there much integration between females and males at that time?
So that started shortly after I went through boot camp. How it was when I was in boot camp is there was, I believe, 8 or 10 companies in the division. There were 2 female companies. So both female companies had a brother company, but most brother companies had another brother company. So you had, you know, a brother company, or a couple of the male companies had a sister company. So we had a brother company that we did everything with. Our barracks were not in the same building. They had the females separated from the males, but we did everything together, like the firefighting, the gas chamber, all of the things we did together with our brother company.
Mm. Mm.
But we weren't allowed to even look at one another, or
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's pretty typical in our basic training. I had a sister flight, and they pretty much deterred the women from even looking at us, the men flight, and they pretty much just said, all these guys are bald and ugly, so you don't even want to mess with them. We were in the same building, but it was very. They kept us busy enough to where we didn't do anything. But I'm interested. You said you guys did some firefighting during basic training. Walk me through a little bit of your basic training, because it sounds to me, or your boot camp, because it sounds to me like boot camp for the Navy is a bit different than the rest of them. So
boot camp in the Navy, you do have to swim. You have to be able to pass the swimming test, and that's probably what most people who struggled in boot camp, they struggled with the swimming. So some people had to go to remedial swimming, but you're on a ship, and so if you're on a ship and you end up overboard, you know, you have to be able to take your pants off and tie them as a flotation device and float around in the ocean, or swim, tread water until they can get you back on the boat. You also have to be able to put out fires yourself if you're on a submarine or a ship, because the fire department obviously cannot get to you. So in boot camp, one of the things you learn is firefighting, and it was done in a controlled building, obviously, where they were controlling the fire, but you took turns moving up on the hose, different positions to go in and put the fire out.
Wow. That's intense. So moving on from basic training, did you have training after that?
Yep.
AIT training?
So I went to A school and C school is what we called it in the Navy. So I went to A school in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, which was actually an Army base. But I was a cryptologic technician, or military intelligence, and in that area, all of the branches of services come together. So I was actually stationed at an Air Force base in Japan, So my A school was at an Army base in Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And then my C school was in Pensacola, Florida, at a Navy base. So.
Okay. And how was training for that?
Well, initially in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, it was pretty boring, because it was learning Morse code, doing Morse code, maybe 8 hours a day, until we could get up to a certain speed at a certain very high percentage of accuracy to be able to copy Morse code. But you actually get to where it's natural, and you can carry on a conversation and have Morse code going in the background, carry on a conversation, and still copy the message, because it just becomes like an automatic response after a while. But it takes time to get to that point. So in Fort Devens, that's primarily what I was doing, was learning Morse code. And then when I went on to Pensacola, I learned other types of signals that we also work with.
Okay, and so how long was your training altogether, from basic training to the end of your A and C school?
Let's see, it was about a year altogether for both schools, maybe just over a year.
Okay, all right. And then what was your first duty station?
So my first duty station was Misawa, Japan.
That's nice.
Middle of rice fields of northern island of Honshu in Japan.
Wow. What did you think of that?
It was a big culture shock. It was interesting, but very different. You know, I actually lived out in town in Japan, so it was interesting.
It was interesting. So this was around 1993.
Yeah.
By the time you got to Misawa.
By the time I got to Japan, it was the end of 1993.
Okay, all right.
No, sorry, end of 92.
End of 92.
92.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But I was there 92 to 90, and I left in 95. So.
In 95. Okay. Not a whole lot going on during that time, as far as the world is concerned, as far as the military is concerned. So peacetime.
Yeah,
roughly?
I mean, so we had the first Gulf War kind of going on at the time I enlisted, but obviously that wasn't going on around Japan. So it had resolved pretty much by the time I got to Japan. So.
Okay. What was your job duty out there in Misawa?
So in Misawa, I was a cryptologic technician. I worked in high frequency direction finding. So.
Okay. So you transitioned from Morse code to this.
You kind of have to know Morse code to do any of it. Like, so in direction finding, we would listen to Morse code.
Okay.
As well.
Did this require you to be on a ship?
When I was in, actually, females in my job were not allowed to go to sea. That, as I was in and leaving Japan, that's when they first opened it up to females to be able to go direct support to a ship. But when I went in, it was pretty unheard of to have a female on a ship. So our sea duty was considered overseas. So Japan, for me, counted as sea duty because that's what the women could do. As I was leaving Japan, actually, my best friend from the military was the first female to be stationed direct support as a CT.
Wow.
And her orders were out of Bahrain. So.
Okay.
So it was still uncommon at that time while I was in for females. It's much more common now for females to be on a ship with that job.
Did your training prepare you for this? I mean, I imagine that the training, your A and C school, that
so yes,
they wouldn't adjust it for just females that weren't on ship.
So no, and actually my C school was actually for a completely different area than what I actually ended up doing in Japan. So the direction finding, the high frequency direction finding, when I got attached to that division, it was pretty much all on the job training. I didn't have the school for that particular job, but they needed a body in that division, so they put me in that division, and then I kind of learned it on the job. So my actual training, I was supposed to be doing something else in Japan, but when I got to Japan, they didn't need people for what my actual MOS was, my C school, and so they put me in direction finding, which I ended up loving, honestly. So.
Okay. What did you do for recreation while you were out in Misawa?
Oh boy, what did we do in Misawa? We would, we had a lot of snow, so we would sled down the hills on the base. We only maybe had 1 week a year of decent weather. It was either, monsoon season, or so raining all the time, or lots of snow and very cold. So we would sled. We would actually, all of our commercials were like the Geneva. We only had one TV channel at that time, and AFRTS, we used to call it AFARTS. We also only had one radio station. So we would ask family or friends from home to send us TV shows, because the TV shows we had on our one station were they were awful. They were 8 to 10 years old. It shows we watched, maybe when we were in 5th or 6th grade, like The Facts of Life, or we had one soap opera as well, and it was years old. It was actually the soap opera I'd watched, but I already knew everything that was going to happen because it was from years ago. So we would ask for tapes of shows from back home, or ask for really commercials, because we had no commercials. And you complain about commercials until you go a couple years and you don't get to see a commercial. And then you want to see the commercials. So we would, have people send tapes, and we would all get together and watch the videotapes of just commercials or of various TV shows. Or, sometimes we would watch the Japanese channels, because they had really funny game shows, and even though you couldn't understand anything they were saying or what the point was of the game show, they were amusing and entertaining to watch. So we would watch those and laugh about them.
They're very animated.
Yeah. There was a small, I wouldn't even consider it a mall, but it was a mall for, I guess, rural Japan, which is about 45 minutes from the base. It was in Hachinohe, Japan. So sometimes we would go over there. And they also had a park that had like a miniature Statue of Liberty statue at the park. It was just like our Statue of Liberty, but a lot smaller. So we'd go to Hachinohe, or we had a road at the time. The poles were all painted green. We called it Green Pole Road. That had a lot of little Japanese shops and restaurants. So we would go out to Green Pole Road, various things, but there wasn't a whole lot, in Misawa. It was so far from Tokyo or from any of the big cities of Japan that we kind of had to be creative in what we did for entertainment.
Speaking of asking, family and friends for videotapes, how did you stay in contact with your family and friends while you're in?
So when I was in Japan, we didn't have the internet, or at least not like the internet that we have today. So there was no email, and it was very expensive to call home back then. Now you can call internationally and pay a flat rate and talk unlimited on a lot of plans. It was not like that in Japan. So we could buy these cards they were 1,000 yen, which was about the equivalent of about $10 roughly, give or take a little bit. And you got about 8 minutes of talk time on those. So we would buy cards and be able to talk for 8 minutes. Or, I lived out in Japan, in the community in Japan, and they had these, it was crazy expensive to get an actual phone in your house unless you got a payphone. So they had these great big pink payphones that weighed about 500 pounds. The handset alone probably weighed 20 pounds. So my family could call me into that phone, but if I used that phone, then I would have to sit there and every couple minutes, put 100 yen coins into the phone. So my family could call me, or I could call them collect from one of the phones on base. I couldn't call them collect from my house phone. But I could get those little cards that would give me about 8 minutes to call home. And like I said, we didn't have the internet back then. I think it's probably much easier to stay in contact today. Back then it was so expensive to call that I maybe only called home once or twice a month for just a few minutes at a time.
Okay. So you said you stayed in Japan till about 95. What did you do from there?
So I actually got out of the Navy for a year. So I got out of the Navy in January of 95, and then I went back into the Navy November of 95. So I was out for about 11 months. So during that time I was out, I lived in Florida for a little bit, I lived in Indianapolis for a little bit, in Ohio, and then went back into the Navy.
What made you decide to go back into the Navy?
I missed it. You know, I had gotten out of the Navy related to a bad experience I had the first time I was in the military, and that situation kind of resolved itself. And I wanted this stability. I had a daughter. I wanted this stability, the health insurance, and the benefits that the military had to offer. And I missed my friends that I had in the military. So I wouldn't have gotten out the first time had it not been for a bad situation that I had gone through.
Sure.
So.
Going back into the Navy, did you go into the same career field?
Yes, so I went back in as a cryptologic technician. I actually got a re-enlistment bonus to come back in, because when I came back in, my field was critical manning, and so I was offered a re-enlistment bonus to go back in. That's actually how it came to be. Is the recruiter called me one day and said, "Did you realize if you come back in, we would give you this money?" And I was like, you know, so I went back in, same career field, stationed in Kenia, Hawaii.
Wow.
So.
Man. So you're seeing quite a bit of the world while you're in. How was Hawaii?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. I ended up living there for 10 years. So even after I got out, I continued living there. My ex-husband was also active duty Navy, so we were stationed there for 10 years. So to me, in a lot of ways, I consider Hawaii home. It feels like home to me sometimes more than Ohio does now, because I love Hawaii and the people of Hawaii.
What was the difference between what you did in Japan and what you did in Hawaii? So
in Hawaii, I was actually what they would call collection. So I was actually copying messages. So I wasn't doing the direction finding anymore. I was actually intercepting and copying messages. And also, while I was in Hawaii for 1 year, I had the opportunity for a special assignment, and I worked as a legal assistant for the staff JAG officer, which was wonderful experience. So
that's good. That's really good. Did you need any training for that?
It was kind of all on-the-job training.
Yeah.
You know, I picked things up pretty quickly.
Sure. At this point, when you re-enlisted and then went to Hawaii, were you the same rank? Did you?
Yeah. So when I got out of the Navy in Japan, I was in E4, and when I came back in, I was still in E4.
Okay.
And then when I got out of the Navy again, I was in E5. So.
I got you. All right. So tell me a little bit about Hawaii. What was the environment like? What did you do for
perfect weather? What did I do for recreation? I went to the beach a lot. So when I worked in Japan, when I was doing collections, I had the great schedule, which was called Deltas, and it was 4 days on, 2 days off, 4:30 in the morning, which a lot of people cringe about, but I got off work at 12:30 in the afternoon every day. So I would get off work at 12:30 and maybe just go to the beach and take a nap. There's so much to do in Hawaii because the weather's pretty much perfect 95% of the time. So a lot of hiking, a lot of outdoor activities, hiking, going to the beach, camping, picnics, maybe flying to one of the other islands, Maui or the Big Island for a few days. There's never a shortage of things to do in Hawaii if you enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Wow. Food. What was the food like out there?
Well, I'm a very picky eater. So you can get Spam at McDonald's in Hawaii.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Not that I ever did, but you can. My kids grew up in Hawaii, so you know, you open a can of spam around them, and they're kind of like dogs begging. They have these things called spam musubis, which is like a bed of rice, a slab of spam, wrapped in seaweed, and it's got soy sauce in it. And my kids love those things. And you can get them at the movie theater, you can get them at the 7-Elevens, you can get them all over in Hawaii. And so when we left Japan, that was one of the things, left Hawaii, I'm sorry, one of the things my kids complained about the first time we went to the movies, because they always got a spam musubi at the movie. And there was no spam musubis at the movies anymore.
What is this popcorn?
Right. They didn't want popcorn, they wanted spam. And like I said, you get spam at McDonald's in Hawaii. There's poi. There, a lot of Kahlua pork. But again, I'm kind of a picky eater. I'm a vegetarian, or was a vegetarian until a few years ago. I do now eat chicken. But when I was in Hawaii, I didn't really eat a lot of meat. So I wouldn't be the person to ask about what the food's like.
Well, how was, speaking of you being a vegetarian, how was being a vegetarian in the Navy?
So in boot camp, I ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So much so that I promised myself once I got out of boot camp, I would never again eat another peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and to date I haven't. And that's been 25 years ago, and so for 25 years now I have not had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but I had a lifetime full of them in boot camp. So it's all right. I ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly, and being in Orlando, we also had a lot of fresh fruit. So I ate a lot of fresh fruit, and a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
So that was pretty much your only options was peanut butter and jelly.
Well, there would be occasionally other options, but yeah, it was a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Wow. Yeah. All right. So what time did you eventually get out of the Navy?
So I got out of the Navy again in November of '95. I was medically discharged. So.
Okay. All right. And what did you do at that point?
So since I was medically discharged, I was connected with the VA while I was still going through the med board process and everything. That's one thing I will say, my command was awesome as far as making sure I was connected with VA and VA benefits. So when I got out, at first for a little while, I actually did work as a legal assistant as a civilian, based on my experience working as a legal assistant for the JAG officer. I had a lawyer who took a chance on me. So I worked for him for several months, like as a legal assistant in training. But then I got approved for vocational rehabilitation through the VA. So I ended up just going back to school and focusing on my education. So I went to school, got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree through voc rehab.
That's great. That's great. And what do you do now?
Now I am a supervisory vocational rehabilitation counselor for the VA. So that's actually been a great experience to have gone through the program as a participant, and then kind of gone through as an employee, and now I've worked my way up to where now I'm a supervisor for the program.
It's amazing. It's really good. Do you stay in contact with any of your? I know you mentioned one of your best friends being in the Navy.
Yeah, so there's a few people I stay in contact with. You do lose contact with a lot of people, but there are a few that I'm still in contact with, and I would say that, especially like when you're stationed overseas like that, I think the friendships you make are a lot stronger in many ways than other friendships you make in your life, because everybody's overseas and everybody's missing their family, so they kind of become your family, and you form a pretty strong bond with people. So there are still several people that I maintain contact with.
That's good. And veteran organizations, are you a part of any veteran organizations?
I am a member of the DAV, Disabled American Veterans, but I don't really go to the meetings or anything, but I'm a member.
That's good. Well, I'm sure in your career you find it very rewarding in how much you serve other veterans in that way. So reflecting back in your military experience, what would you say would be one of the greatest life lessons that you've learned?
I would say from the military, I got a lot of self-discipline and a lot of belief in myself that I am very capable and I can do whatever I set my mind to. And I don't know that I fully believed that before I went in the military, but getting through boot camp and getting through some things in the military, I'm not easily frazzled. No matter how stressful something is, I know that I can get through it. And, a lot of self-discipline, to be able to see something through. If I start something, I will see it through to the end.
It's very good. Your military service, how has that impacted your feelings on the military and war, the potential of war?
I love the military. I love military veterans, and I wish we didn't have war. I have a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion. And I know that being in the military, sometimes you do have to do things. You don't have a choice to do things that you may not always agree with, but you agreed to do what was needed of you. And so, I view the military positively. I think it's been, I would not be where I am in my life today had I never gone in the Navy. I know that. I attribute, my success, and I do consider myself to be a successful person. I don't believe I would be as successful as I was had I not gone in the military. So for me, it was life-changing, and I think it's life-changing for many people. And so I love the military. And I do believe there are, some things that could be improved upon, but that's anywhere you go. I will say when I served in the military, and more so my first go-around, it was quite a bit different experience my second go-around. But as a female, there were some people who I believe felt that women didn't belong in the military. And so that was something I had to put up with, and that was difficult. And I hope that it's not the same way now for females in the military. I hope that, they're embraced better than maybe we were, 25 years ago or even prior to when I went in.
Yeah, I hope so as well. For future generations, they have the opportunity to look at this, being that this is going to be archived. What would be the message that you would want to give to them? That
they can do anything, like I said, they really can do anything.
That's good. All right. Well, in closing, is there anything that we may have missed or that you feel that you want to share before we wrap this up?
I can't think of anything at the moment.
Okay. All right.
All in all, there were positive experiences along with some negative experiences, but all in all, it was a very positive experience for me, and probably the best decision I made in my life was to go into the military, because it opened up a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities for me, and gave me, a lot of confidence in myself that I may not have had before.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, thank you very much, Tara, and
Yep.
thank you for your service.
Thank you.